This program is made possible in part by Nebraskans for Public Television. Consider This, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bales Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hi, and welcome again to UNO and to Consider This. There is a lot going on in the world right now, not the least of which is what's happening in the Middle East. And of course, we're still reeling from events of September 11th last year, and that is layered upon concerns that people in this country have already had about things like anti-Semitism and hate crimes. My guest this week is the Plain States Regional Director for the Anti-Defamation League, Bob Wolfson. Welcome to Consider This.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a while since we've sat down to chat, a couple years.
Too long.
Too long. And but it's just like it gets more complex. Just when you think you maybe, reason and understanding are becoming part of our everyday world, something just gets layered on top, and we never seem to. Are we making any progress?
I think many of the people who are in the intelligence business and the analyst business said right at the beginning of the fall of the Berlin Wall and the decline of the Soviet Union that one day we would all decry the present and look back at the good old Cold War days and say, oh, wasn't it wonderful then? When you have one superpower and lots of other people running around seeking influence and power, it is a much more complicated world than it was when the United States and Russia sort of balanced each other off.
After 9/11, there was a lot of concern about hate crimes against the Muslim population.
Sure.
And how that was all going to play out. Not hate crimes necessarily, but this anti-Americanism. Would it translate to more anti-Semitism in this country? Would there be clashes, not necessarily between Jews and Muslims here, but between the rest of the population? How is that playing out from someone in your position who, is very concerned about anti-Semitism and crimes against Jewish people, but has also been watching for years and years general hate crimes against gays,
Sure.
Keeping an eye on that?
Well, we're concerned whenever there's any major social upheaval that can cause people to act out. September 11th was clearly one of those events, and shortly after September 11th, we did see a huge explosion of violence and expressions of animosity of one form or another, particularly against Arabs and Muslims, or against people who appeared to be Muslim.
You didn't have to be. They didn't verify.
Right. There was no verification, and that is pretty normal. I wish it wasn't normal, but it is part of sort of our American scenery. People react, especially when there are high emotions that are going on. The issue of where we are with these kinds of crimes generally is a very controversial one, because most states do not require the law enforcement community to report these incidents or hate crimes.
Nebraska does.
Nebraska encourages the reporting. It doesn't require it.
To sort of a central
to
repository.
The crime commission, and then it gets reported to the FBI, who keeps track of these numbers. And these numbers are notoriously unreliable because not every crime that is reported as a hate crime gets into the statistics. Not everybody who experiences a hate incident, which might be criminal, reports it to the police. And even those crimes that are reported to the police don't always get accurately reported. So our country is just beginning the struggle of trying to understand where we are in the expression of hatred and bigotry, both where it is criminal in nature, in which case it's actually reported as a hate crime, and where it is less than criminal, but is still very damaging to the people who experience it.
Well, just this month in Omaha, we saw the situation where just horrible, at least on their face, were anti-Semitic graffiti on a Bethel synagogue, a conservative synagogue, a conservative congregation here in Omaha. Like Die, Jew, Die, and swastikas, if I recall the pictures correctly.
Right.
But then just around the corner, there was, at one of the portable buildings of one of the schools, there were just swear words. Now, I don't know if that was the same person. They arrested a 17-year-old man this past week. And they're, I guess, going to not I don't know if they've decided if they're going to charge him with a hate crime in addition, which is sort of ratchets up the potential penalty.
Right.
But that's a kid, still legally a kid. It's a hateful thing. I mean, the sight of it, just neighbors in general, be they Jewish or not, must have been, many of them, reviled by it.
And the good news is that the community reacted very appropriately. When people are the victims of hate crimes or hate incidents, one of the key features that prevents a community from feeling isolated by this experience, that's the purpose of many of the perpetrators of this, is to make the group that is being targeted feel afraid, feel isolated. It's a way of saying you don't belong here. And the community—
You're an outsider.
You're an outsider. And the community responded by saying that very night when it was discovered, tens of cars stopped by the synagogue and helped try and remove the graffiti, asked what they could do. Phone calls were made. People gave money and did whatever they could to express their revulsion and their support of the community in the face of that. The swear words, by the way, were accompanied by 420, which you may know as April 20th, which is Adolf Hitler's birthday.
Oh, so this doesn't, I mean, somebody knew something as opposed to some kid. I mean, I think we grew up in this country. I mean, I'm from the time I was, in grade school, I knew what a swastika was, and I knew loosely what it represented. The atrocities and the regime of Adolf Hitler.
Right.
But the fact that somebody would write 420 would tell me they know a little.
Right.
A little more.
And the people that perpetrate these kinds of crimes come in three varieties. They're thrill seekers, they're reactionary people, and they're mission-driven people. Actually, the least number of crimes are committed by people who are mission-driven, people that are dedicated Nazis or skinheads and are trying to send a message. That's the least number. Then there are thrill seekers, just people seeking to have fun, and they may not even know what the swastika means. They're just looking to upset the community. And then the other is the reactionary people who are reacting to something. In this case, we believe this young man was reacting to a lecture at Benson High School by a Holocaust survivor, and was motivated by his unhappiness about the Middle East and his feelings about the Middle East, and expressed it in this terribly negative and damaging way.
The Middle East, which has been an ongoing since, well, thousands of years, literally, in some fashion or another. That has added another layer, though, because the American people, who are by and large good people who try to understand these events, and just as we've tried to understand for hundreds of years the situation in Northern Ireland and the various ethnic and religious kinds of things that go on and on and on. But this latest round of activity, and that's using a mild word, over in Israel and the surrounding territories, have left a lot of Americans scratching their heads.
Well, the vast majority of Americans that are surveyed understand and believe that the United States should support Israel, that Israel has a right to exist, that it has a right to exist as a Jewish state, and that there should be some positive resolution of this conflict. They don't know what that positive resolution is. If you want to win a quick peace prize from the Nobel Committee, figure out how to solve the peace problem in the Middle East.
That's a sure thing, isn't it?
It's a shoo-in. It's a very complicated set of circumstances. The Palestinians desperately want and need some kind of a positive move forward where their lives can substantially change. The lives of the average Palestinian is terrible. They live in economic disaster. They live in a military disaster. As they seek to find this independent state, they have leadership that does not necessarily believe that living in peace with their next door neighbors is what they want to do.
Well, in fact, most publicly they've been stated that they still feel that Israel does not have the right to its own state, and
well, that's the fundamental source of the disagreement.
Right, and do the Palestinians on the other side, do they have some sort of birthright there? And there's no quick fix, and yet with what's happened over there in terms of the Israeli governments, and I'm not going to get into some political thing, but the attacks on the cities there that the UN is investigating. I mean, that's left people, I don't think, here in this country questioning that there are good people over there, but just wondering how this is all playing out in terms of just the hate in general.
Yeah. Well, to show you how complicated it is, you inferred that the UN was investigating. The UN wants to investigate.
The Jenin, I guess.
And it's
I
been
believe.
prevented from doing so by Israel because the Kofi Annan, the Secretary General of the UN, appointed people to it that A, don't have any military experience, and B,
Yes, they want a little more military background.
And B, several of them already have animosity towards Israel and are pro-Palestinian to begin with. So Israel wants a group, if they're going to investigate, to come in and really report the facts and not make conclusions. This is very controversial because the United Nations is controlled primarily by third world countries who have over and over again shown that they have no particular love for the state of Israel. Whether it's at the Conference on
And
Racism.
many for the United States either.
And the United States as well. And whether it's the Conference on Racism in Durban, which was a huge anti-Semitic love fest, or it's the Fourth Geneva Conference, or any of the United Nations conferences, the United Nations has consistently shown an animosity towards Israel and a pro-Palestinian stance. So the Israelis are not going to let just anybody come in and willy-nilly do an investigation of Jenin, especially when the Israelis lost 23 soldiers going house to house and carefully only fighting combatants in Jenin, when they could have just as easily just taken a foghorn and announced they were going to bomb the place and leveled the entire place, and no one would have been able to investigate anything.
Well, maybe people will listen a little carefully, but just for the casual news observer, I think the average American maybe catches a couple of world newscasts a week, maybe our national news, like the NBC Evening News or whatever, and picks up the paper less rarely than we used to. It's whatever is the most recent headline that sort of catches your, and they don't, and it's not a black and white issue anyway, so it becomes even murkier. In recent days.
There's no question that in order to really begin to understand what's going on in the Middle East, you really have to study it. And then, at the end of the day, if you really study it, if you had a guest who was pro-Palestinian and myself who leans towards supporting the State of Israel, you would find us coming to those issues, the exact same issues that you read in the newspaper last night, from diametrically opposed points of view. The issue here is what's going to lead to some kind of a peaceful solution, if there is one. And I believe that we have a long way to go in the process of the Palestinian leadership and the Palestinian people coming to really believe and buy into the right of Israel to exist as a Jewish state next to a Palestinian independent state that lives in peace with secure borders. I don't believe we're very close to that today.
But because of this, and because of 9/11, which dealt with some feeling about the fear from the Muslim extremists in the world, and because some people feel or perceive that that perhaps Israel overstepped. I'm not saying they did, but there's just perceptions coming out of headlines. We don't get enough information, so we just tend to. Is there going to be more? A feeling of less tolerance in general, not just about Muslims and Jews, but just, I don't understand it, even isolation. White, let's say Christian, or it could be Buddhist American, just, kind of battening down the hatches in a sense.
Well, I think there's a natural tendency for some people to bunker mentality, but the truth of the matter is the United States is the only superpower. We're the only game in town. We're the only big guys with big sticks.
We've got big sticks.
And that takes some certain responsibility along with its benefits. And I believe the United States, whether it likes to or not, is going to remain engaged all over the world. The way we define our national self-interest is global, not local. And I believe that there are lots of reasons that the United States today, President Bush is meeting with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia in Crawford, Texas, for a reason. He's meeting with him to talk about oil and to talk about Iraq and to talk about the Palestinians and the Israelis and many of these issues, which to some Americans seem very distant from American concerns.
Well, as long as we get the petrol for the cars.
If oil was $4 a gallon, people might feel very differently about it. And that, of course, is the concern of the American people. We're worried about the things that affect us. In the case of the Palestinians and the Israelis and the broader Arab-Israeli conflict, the American people are connected with and are in the history and line of the Jewish people. We are, by tradition, by values, democracy, pluralism, respect for difference, respect for human life, a desire to let political process be the first choice rather than military process.
Yeah, the
But
threads of the fabric run through the
all
American
very
psyche.
much connected to Israel and the United States. It's why Israel and the United States are so close. It's why it drives many of the Arab countries crazy that the United States is so closely aligned with Israel. But it's not by accident. It's not just by fate.
Yeah, or we just chose.
That we just chose.
Pick, flip the coin and pick sides.
No, I don't think it's that way at all. I think if the United States looks at that, they have to take a balanced approach to it. And the Israelis, at the end of the day, are fighting for their very existence. If you're fighting against a people that are willing to praise 18-year-old girls that strap bombs onto themselves and go into a cafeteria or to a pizza parlor or to a Passover service in a hotel and blow themselves up, it is not the same thing as a military combatant. It is not the same thing as military war, and the Israelis just have to do something. And you're looking at what they've done. They've taken the situation in hand, and since they've done that, the suicide bombings have almost been eliminated. They've discovered
They're pretty tied up.
they've discovered over 30 factories that were illegally manufacturing explosives and various kinds of weapons that were illegal under the Oslo Accords. They have dismantled the terrorist infrastructure in many of these camps and in many of these cities. And whether we like it or not, from a purely military point of view, what Israel has done has provided the one thing that a government has to have or it can't exist, and that is a pledge to safeguard its people. And if you can't deliver on that, then all the other fancy stuff like taxes and whether the streets are paved or not really gets very far down the list if your kids aren't free to go to their schools and feel safe.
And it appears none of them is. Whether you're a Palestinian, you're still suffering, a child, you're still suffering the consequences of this strife.
There's plenty of suffering around.
If you're a kid, you're a kid. You basically want to do, what it is that kids do.
There's plenty of suffering to go around in the Middle East.
You mentioned that whether we like it or not, we're in this global position. And I think of, we have someone who I've never met, certainly read a lot, seen a few pictures of down in Lincoln, who operates out of his home and works in a rather global capacity, and that's Gary Locke.
Gary Rex Locke.
Who has been successful in distributing pro-Nazi literature all around the world, and continues to be able to do that. And that is free speech, and that's what we...
Publishes his magazine in 11 languages. Distributes it all over the world by the tonnage.
By the tonnage.
By the tonnage. Is connected to and supported by other various neo-Nazi groups. He is dedicated to the reestablishment of a new Reich in Germany of the National Socialists. His organization, the National Socialist People Workers' Party, off-land organization, the NSDAPAO, is a registered corporation in the state of Nebraska that he has operated since the early 70s, and its sole purpose is to work to politically bring a new Hitler-like government to power in Germany.
You know, what strikes me is that would be something that Muslims, Jews, and any other disenfranchised group, gays, could line up against that, because the whole Adolf Hitler thing and the racial purity and all that kinds of thing. I mean, there's still a market for it. Obviously, he's found a market, and it's a growing market, or I'm sure he's paying for his rent pretty well.
I think he does okay. I don't think we have to worry about where his next meal is coming from. And you're seeing this in Europe in all kinds of ways. The power of Le Pen, the right-wing candidate who's now running for the government position in France. There's problems in Belgium, Lithuania, Poland, Germany, Turkey, Greece, Italy, the Soviet Union, and now from all of the Arab countries. There's cartoons and things coming out on television that Adolf Hitler would be very proud of. Unbelievable myths about Jews taking Palestinian children's blood to make a Hamantaschen for the Purim holiday. Cartoons, official government newspapers making claims that are just outlandish. that are just lies. Israelis go into Ramallah and they get a document that shows that Arafat is paying for suicide bombers, and their answer is that it's all a forgery. The Israelis are forging documents. It's lie. It's the old Hitler idea. You tell a lie, you tell it really loud, you tell it over and over again, and pretty soon you can't tell the difference between what's truth and what's a lie.
The pot is still stirring.
Pot is still stirring.
And
whether it's Gerhard Lauck from the Nazi side, or it's other people who would like to use various forms of tyranny to control information in the world. This is a real problem.
You know, though, it strikes me, though, that we're in a prime position to have more of that kind of thing happening in this country or any country where immigration is met with such mixed emotions. Take the Irish, for instance, who are having some real problems because they're having to fill jobs, and have been for a number of years since they've raised their level of education, to Africans and Eastern, Western Asians and that. And we have some strife. It's kind of low level on the radiation scale about, Mexicans and other immigrants, and there's this. I just know, I feel that countries are ripe. In France, that's part of the reason this fella may be president, who's
God forbid,
who's against foreigners, is that we tend to want to be like our neighbors, and I think that's a natural tendency, and so we have that bunker mentality to sort of to keep, not because we don't like them necessarily, just because it's easy for us to deal with when we're all of homogeneity. And the world is no longer homogeneous.
Yeah, well, it's
in
not
any
only the
particular
world is not longer
country.
It's not only that the world is no longer homogeneous. Your schools are no longer homogeneous. Your neighborhoods are no longer homogeneous. When I started this business 14 years ago, maybe you could find some classrooms where there were kids taking English as a second language that were from Spanish-speaking countries of one form or another. Today, there are 23 native tongues being spoken in the elementary schools in Omaha Public Schools alone. That's children from 23 different languages, whether it's the Sudan or Bulgaria or Lithuania or it's Mexico or wherever it's from. There are 23 languages spoken. Your notion of what it is your community is about is very different when you say to your kids, you're going to be sitting next to a kid who looks just like you, who has the same background as you, who is the same racial group as you,
same religion
as you, just like your mother and your grandmother and grandfathers did, as opposed to the kid today that if they sit next to somebody at FDR or at Mutual of Omaha or Valmont or any of the hundreds of other places they're likely to work as young adults, they're going to be sitting next to people from India and from Pakistan and from Egypt and from Israel and from Russia and from all over the globe. So it's not just a fantasy that the global economy is here. It is a reality.
But I think there is a natural tendency. I mean, you see it in all kingdoms of living on this earth, and the animal kingdom, that the outsider, we need, and we're certainly as humans more capable than any species to adjust. But there's just adjustment problems.
It's
and they
just
create
always who the outsider is.
Right, but it allows people like Gary Lauck
Sure.
to prey upon fears, economic woes.
So what's the answer to that?
I don't know.
You have to make it so that people understand that people who are from the outside, your family, one generation or two generations ago was on the other side of that issue.
Oh yeah, but we forget. Sometimes it's been 3 and 4, and that's why I think there's a sense.
We have to remind ourselves
there's
that
a sense of forgetting.
That America as a country is great because of immigration. America as a country is strong because we have a diverse population. America as a country is better because people from various backgrounds go into making the decisions that are made.
Does the Anti-Defamation League get concerned about, disrupting mythologies in general, like the wave from the south of the border is taking away jobs, or when many of these jobs are going begging? Not all, but some packing plants, for instance, where
I have a friend who likes to say there's no shortage of jobs, there's a shortage of pay.
That is probably, well, then they blame the
right.
lower and deflated wages.
Right.
Packing wages have gone down and, when adjusted
If
for
the
inflation.
packing plants paid $15 an hour, they wouldn't have any trouble finding local people to do the jobs.
Right, but they blame-
But at $7 an hour, they have to. They aren't filling those jobs, and it's not just the packing plant industry.
Right, but
it's
we
lots of
that's
others.
just an easy.
But that's what America has always been built on. People from other countries have always come and they enter at the places where there are jobs. And then their children get better education and maybe go to college or maybe learn a trade and they do better. And the next generation does even better and they go to college and become doctors and lawyers and politicians and all kinds of things. And that's the nature of our country, and it has been for 200 years.
If you could change, let's say, in Nebraska, although you deal with how many states?
3 states.
3 states?
Nebraska, Kansas, and Iowa.
If you could make some changes, not that laws change people's hearts and minds, what would you change here in Nebraska?
Well, I think that there are several things that we could do that would do things better, and there is a difference between what you can do legally and what you need to do in terms of making an atmosphere. In terms of making an atmosphere, I think we have to show better leadership at talking about the diversity of our people, at helping people not be afraid of that diversity.
Doing a lot of kumbaya.
Well, it's more than kumbaya.
Yeah, it doesn't always.
It's a question of survival of our people, of our businesses. In 20 years, they're not going to be able to hire people to go to work in our businesses that don't come from a diverse background. All you have to do to know that is go to the 4th grade classroom and look around and look at the kids' last names and understand that whether we're comfortable with that change or not, it's already here.
Right,
They're
and that
Hispanic,
Nebraska would shrink if that weren't to happen.
and if you want it to shrink, then okay, that's one of the things you can do. But if not, you want to hold on to those kids so that you take the intellectual capital that we've invested in as a state and hold on to our children and have them stay here and experience what we hope will be the good life here. In order to do that, those kids have to feel comfortable here. They have to feel that Nebraska is supportive, not of pointing out that they're the other, but that they are Nebraskans, and that they belong here and that they're part of our heritage and part of our tradition. So one of the key factors is really looking at what in Nebraska we do day in and day out that makes people who are perceived as the other either feel included or feel excluded. Doesn't matter what the category is.
Okay, we've got about 30 seconds. If you could pass a law, assuming it had any teeth or meant anything, what would it be?
I think I'd work on a law that was working on educating people about other groups, making sure that we really educate each other so we're not made afraid by the other.
Something more than just superficial. We have a bill, we
Much
have a
more
committee,
than superficial.
we're holding a few meetings.
Serious stuff.
Okay, well then I'm sure in the next year, because you take that so seriously, you'll be proposing.
Working on it every day.
All right, thanks a lot.
Thanks
Bob
for having me.
Wolfson is Plains State Regional Director for the Anti-Defamation League. You can call the ADL if you want more information. If you want more information on this show or would like to see it streamed on your computer, go to untv.unomaha.edu. You can find it there. Thanks, Bob, for joining us.
Thanks.
And thank you for joining us on Consider This.
This program is made possible in part by Nebraskans for Public Television.